Hey there, welcome back to the Auto Ranch. Happy New Year to you. I hope everyone had a great holiday season and your new year is starting off well. We got a good one today. One that's kind of a favorite in the garage. They're certainly a lot more expensive and cars that are much faster than this car, but this car is a special car for a lot of us and probably for a lot of you who are viewing this. You know, if you grew up in the early 90s, the Nissan Sentra SE-R, for a lot of us, you know, in high school age at that time, maybe even a little later, this was the car to have. And when I was in high school, I used to beg my mom to let me trade my Chrysler LeBaron for it. And I would have more than happily have worked to pay for the difference, but she wasn't going to have it. I always said somewhere later in life, if the right one came along, I would buy it. I did try that once in, I think, the early 2000s. I had a 94 that I bought that had, I don't know, I think it had 80,000 miles. The thing was ratted out. It had the famous fifth gear pop-out problem, lots of other issues. So I didn't keep it more than a couple weeks, honestly, and I sold it. But I kept looking. I always said, you know, if one popped up that was clean, I would try and buy it. And this last April on Bring a Trailer, just that appeared. This beautiful 91 Sentra SE-R. It had 435 miles on it at the time that I bought it. Those are original miles from one owner. A gentleman by the name of Dr. Khalil. He was a neuroscientist that lived in Wisconsin. He did a lot. He was one of the pioneers of the stem cell research related to the brain. So if you've had anyone or family that's benefited from that type of research, there's a good chance he had a hand in it. Super smart guy, graduated from Harvard. In addition, I think he also had a degree from MIT, if I remember right. He was a car enthusiast, but he had certain vehicles and things that he liked. He loved BMW motorcycles, Italian bicycles, and Nissan Sentra SE-Rs. He had two of these. He actually bought this one, and I believe a red one that was for his wife. The red one they drove pretty much every day, until I think it eventually was totaled out due to a hailstorm, if I remember right. But this car he kept kind of stowed away as a collector piece. It meant a lot to him. He had his wife said that, you know, he had an appreciation for things that were unique and that were well put together. You know, and this was a car at the time. Like I said, it was Car and Driver's 10 Best list from 91 to 94 for a reason. It was considered the BMW 2002 of the 90s. And actually at the time, it was compared to a 318 BMW. It was 1 second faster, 0 to 60, and had a higher top speed than the BMW. Again, we're talking entry-level BMWs. But this is a car, remember, that cost $13,000. Or less when it first came out. That's unheard of today. I mean, we just don't have those type of performance cars. Even if you adjust for inflation, there's just nothing that kind of gives you that raw feel that this car did in the early 90s. It was very analog, you felt attached to the road, very high revving car, 140 horsepower. It's 7,500 RPM redline. It also had a limited slip differential as well as independent suspension. That's a lot for, again, a $13,000 car. There was a reason why these were so popular. And I think for a lot of you, and I'd love to hear about it in the comments, what did this car mean to you? One thing I learned about this car with buying it on Bring a Trailer, I think it had 76,000 views on Bring a Trailer. It had like 2,600 watchers and almost 400 comments. And most of those comments were people sharing their stories about a Sentra SE-R, when they owned one, when they sold it, and the importance of things that occurred during their life when they had it. I think it was a car for a generation of car enthusiasts that had significant meaning. And it certainly did for me, which is why when this car came up, I told my wife, I said, I'm gonna try and buy this car. Honestly, I thought it brought a lot of money for what it is, but I thought it would have brought more money. And I think a lot of other people did too. And I got lucky. It was a Sunday auction, it ended. There wasn't a lot of activity at the end. Everybody was waiting for it to get bid up, and it just didn't happen. And I'm grateful that I got the opportunity to kind of be a caretaker for it. You know, as you've seen on the channel, my history is not to keep cars very long, unfortunately. I tend to hold stuff for, you know, a few months, maybe a year. And my plan for this car is that this car will not be a long-term hold for me. I love it. It's helped me fulfill a high school dream car. Realistically, it'll probably go for sale again this spring. And I'll let somebody else enjoy it. It is a beautiful car. When they said this car was like new, it pretty much is. It's 30 years old. It's black. But the paint is in excellent shape. It's got pretty much like a factory shine. If you look down the sides, the body lines are perfect. This car's never had any paint work. There's no rust. And it's one of those cars, every time I come out in the garage, again, there's sportier cars in here, and fancier cars. I still get excited when I look over and see this Sentra. It just brings back memories. I used to go test drive these cars at the Nissan dealership. I remember even going during a snowstorm once because I figured they wouldn't be busy. They'd let me drive it. And you know, these poor guys, they knew I wasn't that serious, but I think they knew I had a thing for the car. They let me drive these over the years until they stopped making them in '94. But again, just a super clean example. You know, I have done some things to it since I got it. I have put 200 miles on the car. That happened after a set of maintenance things occurred, which I'll talk about here in a second when I pop the hood. You know, this car was pretty much original. Well, it was original with all the fluids and everything. There's that Nissan chime from the 90s. Let's take a look under the hood, and I'll share, you know, some of the stuff that I've done to the car to make it so you could put 200 miles if you wanted to. And realistically, you could drive this car if you wanted to on a regular basis. As much as I'd hate to say it, the value of this car is in the low miles. So I've had to restrain myself because otherwise I would have probably, you know, put 1,000, 1,500 miles on this car, and it's not going to be a long-term car for me. So I want to let somebody else do that if that's what they choose. But let's take a look under the hood. So here we are back under the hood. Again, 2-liter, 140 horsepower, 4-cylinder engine, twin cam, 16 valve. You know, the motor, the story goes, this car came, when I bought it in April, this car had all the original fluids, including the oil and the coolant. Now, that made me kind of nervous, I'll admit. You know, the minute the car arrived, I brought it in the garage, and when I got it up on the lift to do the oil change, I knew by looking at the drain plug, it had never been popped. I mean, they're black on these, and so you put a wrench on it, you definitely take off a little bit of the finish. It had never been changed, and that was what, you know, the family had said, and they knew what they were talking about. So I changed the oil immediately. I knew realistically I was worried about the coolant and the brake fluid. I tested both of those for, you know, condensation in the brake fluid and also acidic level of the coolant, and remarkably, they were not bad. They were within specs. The story is the car got its 400 miles realistically from a couple of drives that he did to break it in. And again, I may have forgot to say that he passed away in 2021. The family, as the car went through the process, they decided to sell it in 22. But he had done, most of those 435 miles were done, supposedly in a couple of trips. So the car was not going through heat cycles on a regular basis. It was staying in a climate-controlled garage, and people were told to stay away from it. They knew not to get near Ron's car. And it shows. I mean, the body, like I said, is straight. There's no dings or dents on it. And the paint's in really good shape for being a 30-year-old black car. You can kind of look around. So anyways, I had the brake fluid, just to be on the safe side, I did have the brake fluid flushed, the coolant flushed. What else? The drive belts were replaced, just on the outside drive line belts. I saved all original, everything that came off of it, obviously not the fluids, but the belts were saved. I did have the tires replaced. These came with Dunlop performance tires. I believe they were all-season performance, if I remember right, but they're definitely with Dunlop tires. They were heavily, as you would imagine, they had a ton of basically flat spots is the word I'm looking for, and the car didn't handle very well with those tires, and it was dangerous to be driving a car with 30-year-old tires. So I replaced the tires. I mean, these are 14-inch tires. I mean, you can just look at, it's somewhat comical. I mean, these are like apples and oranges, but you can tell that as a society with cars, we like our big wheels and tires, and for the day, 14-inch tires were not bad, but they're tiny tires. There's not a lot of, they don't make a lot of cars with tires the size is what I'm getting at. So I did replace the tires. I did keep the original Dunlop tires because if you want it all factory, somebody can put those tires back on. It's certainly not safe for driving with them, but I did save them. So oil, coolant, brake fluid, tires, drive belt. The other thing with this car is when the alternator was not working correctly when I got it. It was charging mostly, but the light would occasionally come on. So I bought a OEM, the original OEM alternator for these was a Hitachi model, I believe, for this year. I found one that had been professionally rebuilt, and I put that in. Again, I saved the original alternator, which is the same as what was replaced. Somebody could have that rebuilt if they wanted to. It looks brand new, but obviously something inside the alternator, probably the regulator is what I was told, probably had failed once it started being driven after 30 years of sitting. So that's kind of the mechanicals. Let's take a look back inside to show you what it kind of looks like on the inside. Here we are looking at the trunk, and as you can see, carpet's pretty much like brand new. It does still have the original spare tire and jack, tools. I did buy it. This car did not come with a factory antenna. Believe it or not, it's never had an antenna installed on it. It still has the plug for the antenna. I bought the, parts are starting to become somewhat scarce for these, so I did find one that was a new antenna. I did buy it, but I really haven't utilized it. Again, I joked about this in one of the previews for this review. This car still smells like 1992, and people say like, well, what does that mean? Well, if you remember right, these cars, they were economy cars, so they kind of have that cheap plastic Japanese car smell from the 90s, and this car still smells like that. It's funny, I can still remember that. Getting in, I remember my dad had a 78 Corvette pace car. A few years ago, I drove one, and I'm like, man, that smell, I just remember that as a kid. It's the same with this car. So we're at, turn this on. We're at 664 miles, so it's a little over 200 miles that I've put on it. Clock still works, which is funny. Radio. The antenna's not on it, but I have used the cassette player. There's no Bluetooth or any of those luxuries, but you can use a cassette Bluetooth, which I do use when I've driven it a couple times. Car had all the original owner's manuals. It also had the service manual with it. But like I said, there's not much. It's pretty much a brand new car inside. The air conditioning works. It's still on the original R12. It's cold. The transmission, it's probably one of the few that's left out there that doesn't have the 5th gear pop out that the early 90s SE-Rs had. I mean, it shifts as it should. These revved quickly and high, especially for their time. It has, and you know, it's not the, you know, there's nothing fancy about the exhaust, but the car handles, like I said, it just has, we don't get these analog connected feeling cars that much anymore, and certainly not for this price range. This particular car was a base SE-R. It had the SE-R, I think they called it value package, which gave you air conditioning, cruise control, and the cassette radio. It did not, I think some of these had a sunroof, and then later in the production cycle they did offer an automatic transmission, which obviously would ruin the nature of the enthusiast part of the car. But I'm sure nobody ever sat in the back of this car. Headliner's in excellent shape. Just an all-around, there's just no other one in the world, I firmly believe, that has this type of miles and has been preserved like this. When I said if I could find one that was in good shape, this would have been the dream car for me to do that. So that's why I stepped up and bought it, and I've enjoyed it. Like I said, it's not a ton of miles, but for a car like this, every time I took it out, I wanted to drive it more. It brings back such good memories of the 90s for me, you know, in terms of driving and your life. I even took it to my old high school and took a picture in front of the school, because it was always, you know, as a kid you dream about stuff, you know, what's the car you want to have. And cars were important to me then like they are now. So anyways, that's really kind of the Nissan Sentra SE-R. I appreciate everyone who's been subscribing and following the channel the last month since I've started kind of really trying to focus on the channel. I'm not working at the moment, which is the first time in my career I have to say that. But it's given me time to kind of focus on things I love to do, which potentially, or certainly one of those is cars. So I have been working on some content, and I'm grateful for the 100 people. I think I've gained 100 subscribers in the last month. Still have a long way to go. But if people enjoy the content and you want to know more about the Nissan, or if there's things you want to see in the garage, please let me know. I certainly appreciate you subscribing and liking and commenting. It does help me quite a bit. Plus it gives me motivation to do more of these if it's something that interests you. But again, thank you for the subscriptions, and thank you for listening, and hopefully you enjoyed the story on this SE-R. Have a good afternoon.